Hello everyone, my name is Sabrina McKay and I'm on Main Street today with Mair. So let's start with how you got into being a radio host for CBC.
Well, it was a crooked path. I finished university and I had the travel bug. I'd studied some language and I ended up doing that hoofing around Europe thing with a backpack, being an au pair, and I ended up in Scotland. And I had a business in Scotland, and it was near the Scotsman newspaper, the national newspaper for Scotland, and I ended up hanging out with a bunch of reporters. And I'd always loved the news and radio and reading papers. And I decided to go back home to Canada and study journalism. And I got hired by the CBC.
What was starting on CBC like, I guess?
Well, my first day, I arrived at work and I had the lowest level job in the national radio newsroom. It actually doesn't even exist anymore. Pouring coffee was part of my job, which is not an important journalism skill. Anyway, I arrived at work with like a suit on and a briefcase, and everyone laughed at me because mostly they were wearing sweats and just working around the clock, 24-hour newsroom with correspondence all over the world, that kind of thing. So I quickly learned that I wasn't going to be wearing a suit on my first day and didn't need that. But it was so exciting because the national newsroom was just the heartbeat of our whole organization. And I was working with people that I had only heard or seen. Everyone was very generous. And if a plane went down, if a tragedy happened, we were right at the center of things, and I just loved being part of that.
What in your childhood led you to this career path?
I was raised, I guess, in a non-traditional way. My parents are both immigrants to Canada, so they ended up really exploring Toronto and where we lived, and that opened my eyes to a lot of things. My dad worked in a university community, and so they would expose me to a lot of stuff. If somebody was visiting that was a really good lecturer or there was a demonstration going on, they would, even take me out of school to expose me to stuff like that. And they raised me on radio and newspapers and to ask questions. And so when you're raised in an atmosphere where asking questions is okay, now I get paid to do it. And curiosity is just a good tool to have in your toolkit.
What makes your career enjoyable?
Well, every day is different in my job, and it has been consistently since I started, whether I was working in radio or television news, doing a blog, learning how to do social media. I'm always learning new things, and that is something that keeps me young, I think, and keeps me interested in what's going on in the world. I get to meet amazing people from every day, again, and I get to help them tell their stories. Like, this is a privilege to do what we do, to work in public broadcasting and share those stories with other people.
What is a typical day like for you?
Well, usually I come in, I go to our story meeting, and that's where everybody reflects on the stories that were on that morning or the day before, and they pitch their ideas for what is going to be on their show or what they'd like to do that day. And I'll sort of contribute the ideas that I have for Main Street that day, and I'll also get a sense of what's going to happen through the course of the day, because I usually get some of those news stories that the other reporters are talking about on Main Street. So it just gives me an idea. And then I get to my desk, and I could be editing a piece of tape I'd collected earlier in the field. I could be posting photographs to our Facebook page. Generally, I'm trying to get through the pile of notices on my desk. I have to make a ton of calls and to set up interviews and start negotiating them. I do a lot of emailing. And then I have stuff to do with the show. I produce the show, so I have to make sure that people get paid, that things are planned in advance. So there's a lot to do, and it's not the same at any given time.
What kind of people do you interview on Main Street?
Everybody and anybody. Yeah. We've had really famous people in here, amazing musicians and authors, and people that could be, somebody that from your neighborhood that you didn't even realize had an interesting skill or they got caught up in a story. Here on the island, we'll talk to people that are involved in politics. We do a lot of arts coverage on Main Street, so lots of conversations with authors and musicians and people involved in acting. But we also do different columns, so we talk about business and science. It's kind of like a magazine. It's a 2-hour magazine that you get to listen to with a little bit of music. We always have the weather. We have Boomer on our show. And sometimes traffic when it's busy.
How do you usually prepare for an interview?
Ideally, I'd like to have what we call a pre-interview. So I may be able to do some research on the internet, depending on the kind of story, and talk to the person beforehand. So that'll be over the phone usually, could be through email questions. But that helps me, the more I get before the interview from the person, the better the interview can be, because I'll then know, oh, well, if I ask that question, that answer is kind of boring. But if I ask this question, that's a really cool story. That's what we want to hear. And it also helps me to help the guest, because we only have about 5 minutes, especially when it's live on the radio. So I have to help them to tell their story in a really short period of time. Some people, they'd like to have 2 hours to tell their story, and we just can't do that. So the more I can do beforehand, I also then get a sense of, well, this person is really a good storyteller, or this person is really nervous, that sort of thing.
What kind of education would someone need to get into being a radio host?
More and more people do need to have training. So that could be at a community college, it could be in university. There are specialized journalism programs. It could be a combination of both. But it's like a lot of jobs, a lot of the experience you get from doing it. There's this notion of the 10,000 rule, that you have to do things about 10,000 times to get really good at it. And so I'm still always learning on the job, because it's really humbling to talk to other people about their stories or hear from them. So the career path is different for everybody, but I do recommend a college or university program that gives you a lot of on-the-job kind of training, replicates a studio. Lots of courses now, they get to make their own newspapers or do their own TV shows or radio shows or do their own web stuff. And the more hands-on experience you have, the more likely you're going to get in the door. There's a lot of people out there studying this and trying to work in this field.
What is the main piece of advice you would give to a young person wanting to get into being a radio host?
Don't give up.
Thank you so much, Mair. This has been Sabrina McKay from Next TV.
Cool. Thanks, Sabrina.